Welcome, welcome, everyone. I want to welcome you to another enlightening episode of Diary with a Not So Mad Black Woman. I'm your host, Dawn Sanders, and today we have a truly exceptional guest. Our guest today, Julia Mourer, is renowned for her unwavering integrity and remarkable ability to tackle challenges with innovative solutions. She embodies the essence of empowerment, dedicated to helping others become the best versions of themselves with a unique organizational role defined as knowing people. Julia excels in professionally developing staff to their fullest potential. She has a remarkable talent for identifying and harnessing the strengths within individuals, fostering a collaborative environment that leads to greatness. Julia's expertise lies in employee labor relations, where she shines as a people person who excels at resolving real people problems. Her journey is marked by a strong track record in organizational development, where she has successfully initiated and led multiple complex projects from concept to full operational status. One of her proudest accomplishments is the implementation of Workforce Now, an ADP product that revolutionized her organization's efficiency. This self-service human resource information system transformed performance management and streamlined processes into operational excellence. In addition to her exceptional skills, Julia possesses a unique ability to make the right HR-related business decisions, even in the face of ambiguity, and all while maintaining strong rapport among leadership. Her communication prowess, with both written and verbal, has played a pivotal role in effectively conveying her organization's mission, values, strategies, and goals. Today, Julia has ventured off into her own consulting firm, and she will share with us more about her extraordinary journey as we explore insights into her experiences and her wisdom. I want you to join me as I welcome our guest for today, Julia Mourer.
Wow, thank you so much, Don. Like, I hardly recognize myself when it comes from you. Oh, it's such a privilege and an honor to be on your show today. I know we go back many years, and I am so blessed by the work that you're doing to create awareness around psychological abuse in the workplace. I commend you for having the courage to point out how we've got to do better in creating these psychologically safe spaces for people to work. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yes.
So, so like I said, I hardly recognize myself because, when I hear all the things, rattled off that I've accomplished throughout the years, it feels surreal. I feel like I've come a long way from this little girl from a small town who, was economically disadvantaged and grew up in a town that was surrounded by wealth, but wasn't wealthy herself. And so the fact that God has allowed my path and my journey to lead me to where I'm now, the chief people influencer of my own organization, really feels surreal. So again, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And as you mentioned, we go way back, and you have always been an encouragement in my life. And I wanted to bring you to this platform because I know that your story, your background, your present day efforts that you're doing will be a great help to those who listen to this platform, and it will aid in what we're attempting to do. So without further ado, let's jump into, I've got a few questions prepared. But again, though, you know how we do. We
I
just go
do.
ebb and flow and go along with it. But
Okay.
starting out, I wanted to talk a little bit about your background and your early life. So, can you share your early life experiences that significantly influence your values and your beliefs?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, I've come a long way from a little girl who grew up in an affluent town, an affluent college town where my family wasn't affluent. So we were economically disadvantaged. But my parents had met in this city and married and had children, and then they went their separate ways. And so my mom ended up being a single parent. And although, again, we were surrounded by wealth, we ourselves weren't wealthy. So, what that did was that allowed me to experience a great deal of, of economic challenges. And also, it built in me this desire to want to do better, to want to rise above and beyond my financial circumstances, as well as accomplish some educational goals that I think would have made the difference in my parents' life had they had the opportunity to advance their education. And so, having seen that and experienced that, it just made me hungry to one, belong, and two, to educate myself so that I could become a better version of who I already knew I was, but actually wasn't given an opportunity to display because, quite frankly, I just wasn't from the right side of the tracks.
And that's important to point out because I know that a lot of us, especially coming from a marginalized community as minorities in the United States, many of us have similar experiences from our childhood and growing up. But knowing that you took that challenge and you decided that you were going to do better or have something better, having the experience of seeing it and wanting it. How did you bridge that gap as a child in your childhood? What were some of the pivotal moments or role models that shaped your growth and your development to help you or help guide you away from some of that poverty that you experienced early on?
Well, my first experience was I actually didn't realize that there was a true difference in class until uh, I had a friend that I used to go around her back door and I would knock, but I could never come in the front door. I always had to come around to the back. Well, she invited another friend over, and that friend did not look like me. And so I never quite realized until that moment that I was actually being treated differently. And then in that moment, when I recognized that, hey, I'm being treated differently here, I began to ask more questions. And my mom, who is really strong, became a real strong role model for me. And she began to explain to me why it was that I wasn't, you know, given the privilege of coming through the front door, but had to go through the back door. Now, in that moment as a child, I had to make a decision. Like, uh, I was hurt by that, but I wanted to belong. I wanted the friendship. So I continued to come to the back door, even though I knew it was wrong. Now, when my mother moved into a more affluent neighborhood than the neighborhood that I experienced that discriminatory behavior in, I came back to visit that friend. And this time they let me in the front door,
Mm.
which was very telling to me. Now, again, at the time, I did not recognize that this was not only discriminatory, but it was classist, right? And
Mm.
so, and I was experiencing that as a child and not able to really articulate and put words to what was happening. But looking back on that, I realized that these were the things that would mold and shape me and make me a champion of other people who were striving to belong, and were being discriminated against, either because they were economically disadvantaged, or because they weren't the right race, or because they weren't from the right ethnic group, or because their dialect wasn't considered a cultural norm. And so that actually encouraged me to become a champion and a voice for those individuals who had experienced what I had experienced. And so, yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Julia. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. And so I was saying, so that's really how that started as a young child. And I didn't have hard feelings against that family. It hurt, but you know what? I realized it was probably a subconscious bias that they had towards me. But I purposed in my heart that I would educate others about that, so that others could do better and show up differently.
Right, absolutely. And so as you were talking, and I apologize for cutting you off a little bit there, but it in my mind, I started to formulate the why behind the what you were experiencing. And it's interesting that you brought out that it was a classism case, right, versus a race situation. We all carry multiple biases within ourselves, right? And sometimes they present in different ways. I know we've talked before. I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. So we were all of one race, majority, but of different classes. So I too can relate, right, to being that I come from a family. My parents had two children. Two children. My parents had 12 children. There were 12 of us. And so we were economically disadvantaged, but one of the things that we prided ourselves on was our level of intellect. It was something that we held very strong to, right? And so having that, it helped us to kind of curtail some of the challenges with not having as much as the other children in the neighborhood, but at least we can flash in front of them, but we smarter than you. Look at my report card,
Right.
Oh, right. But I'm interested
it becomes a sense of pride, doesn't it? Yeah, and I think people just think, when they think about discriminatory behavior, that they just think to themselves black and white. But I'm like, oh no, this is much deeper than just black and white. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. The black and white is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to discrimination. But there are many. There is discrimination, like you said, within classes, within races, within, so there's a hierarchy there. And so we want to break them all down. We want to break all those barriers down so that people can be treated equitably and fair.
Right. And so a lot of times the challenges with humans, oftentimes, and I'm not going to say it's innate, because I do not believe that behavior related things we're born with. I do believe that it is natural for humans to want to be superior. So those biases become categories that we like to place people in to make ourselves be more superior than others. So that's a challenge. But but I wanted to ask this question. It was on the tip of my tongue the first time I tried to cut you off. Again, I apologize for that. But with that family, have you maintained a relationship with them after all of these years, or were they just from your past? Have you seen them since you're adult?
I have not seen them since. Interesting. That's an interesting question that you asked that, because I stayed in contact with the friend for a very long time, all the way up through my undergrad. And so this is how I knew that this is probably a subconscious, I'm just making an assumption, a subconscious bias that they had towards me and my family. I mean, my mom was a grocery store clerk, and my uncle, who, owned the house where we lived, was a janitor. And these were, I'm ashamed to say, they were professors. So you would think they were uneducated, because, sometimes we think, oh, it's only the uneducated who have these biases and have these discriminatory thought processes, right? And I'd say, yeah, that's actually not true, because here we are in the, late 70s, early 80s. These are very educated people with, masters and PhDs, and this is how they chose to show up.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, but the most unfortunate part of it is that they were able to reap the fruit of a beautiful relationship. Having known you and experienced you, it almost makes me feel like they didn't deserve it, right? With their mentality and attitude, but God saw different, and it helped to cultivate your growth mindset today. We face these things in the workplace oftentimes when it comes to different biases and discriminatory behaviors and things like that. I wanted to talk about maybe some of your life challenges, some of the things that you faced and had to overcome, especially within your professional career and now with your entrepreneurial journey that you're experiencing. Can you share some of the significant challenges that you face and how you've been able to overcome some of those things?
Absolutely. The reason that I shared what I shared is because, I think we like to believe that the way in which we grow up does not mold and shape our thought processes and what we hope to achieve going forward. And actually, those experiences that I had, those biases against me, did mold and shape my longing to belong. And that longing to belong, like, turns my pain of that, of not belonging, of feeling like an outsider looking in, into purpose. And so when I landed in what I call positions of authority and positions of power, where I had the ability to influence people's lives and decisions, I could decide how I wanted to show up. And so I purposed in my heart to help people feel like they belong, to help people to help other people recognize that people have a voice, and whether they choose to use it or not needs to be their choice and not ours. That we don't have the right to silence other voices because we don't think they have earned the right to be heard. But the very fact that they draw breath and have a voice gives them a right to be heard, and we have an obligation to make sure that there is space for that voice to be heard so that they can feel as though they belong. And so that has really and truly driven my career path. So I've always found myself in positions where I've got to speak truth and make space for people who have been marginalized in the workplace, give them a seat at the table, if you will.
Yes. No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I commend you again for the work and the effort that you've done, especially within your career in employee labor relations. You talked about how your job has given you an opportunity to empower others. And I know that you have a drive and a compassion and passion, rather, for helping individuals to be their best selves and to help them to define their careers. Can you share some of the key moments in your experiences and with your expertise of how you've actually impacted those who were underrepresented, especially in the workplace, and how you were able to help them triumph?
Yeah, so I think just naturally, the Lord has wired me to be curious about people and to watch people and to see how they move, because people say a lot of things with their words, but they say even more with their actions. There is a study that says 90% of what people say is with their body language. And yet, we still seem to put a lot of emphasis on what people say. But I love watching the whole person as they express themselves. I also love watching them as they, like, if there are more than one person in a room and they're interacting, I love watching that. I've done that from the time I was young. When I entered into my career, I was assigned a coach who would assess me. And when they gave me this behavioral assessment, it actually put language to how I was wired.
Mhm.
And when I identified how I was wired, it really affirmed and confirmed what I already knew about myself and my strengths and weaknesses. So then I began to play to those, if you would. And then I also learned, because I learned about how I was wired and how I show up in certain circumstances and situations, I was also able to more readily identify how other people show up, right?
Mhm.
And so if I don't know myself very well, then it becomes extremely difficult for me to know others around me. And so
Mhm.
I might get offended by the way in which they say something or respond to something, or because when they're passionate about something or upset about something, they elevate their voice, right? And I'll take it personal, right? Because
Mhm.
of whatever other experiences I might be bringing to the table. And so by knowing myself, then I can self-regulate so that I
Mhm.
can open my ears and more importantly, my heart to more readily hear what the other person is saying, and not just with the words that are coming out of their mouth.
Mhm.
And so, so that has really been how I have been able to champion other people and help empower them to become the best version of themselves, by helping them to learn themselves.
Mhm.
Like learn, like what one of my famous questions is, well, why is it that bothered you? Like the way
Mhm.
they said that, why did that bother you? And I think that's a question we got to ask ourselves, right? That's a question I ask myself. If I feel pinged about something, I ask myself, what is it about that situation that makes me feel like I'm not being heard, or like they're disrespecting me, or like or it made me angry? What is it about that? And when you pause long enough to process that internally, then it will help you re-engage so that you can continue having communications and conversations with the other people.
Mhm.
And so that's a skill that you have to, I
Right,
think, learn.
right, right. Absolutely. And more often than not, I think that because we are meaning making machines, our emotions are fueled from cognitive distortions that will present in our minds imaginatory or
Yes.
imaginations that really don't exist in reality. But taking things at face value, understanding that in our human form that we are imperfect, giving people the same level of grace that we expect ourselves is really what the whole embodiment of empathy is all about, right? Is understanding
Absolutely.
that sometimes people present a certain way, and we can't take it personal, but it is good to know yourself and to dig deeper to understand, well, why does this bother me? I
Mm-hmm.
know for certain it's certain triggers that I have, and I have to tell people lately, especially my children, it don't have nothing to do with you. It's just a trigger. I'm, I'm as human as everybody else, and that trigger is something that continues to work on me. But I love
Yeah, and we
something
need
that
to understand that when someone says they've been triggered, that's not for us to be like, well, that's your problem, and so you need to deal with it. Like, we need to understand, okay, wait a minute. I just hurt this person, or I have potentially hurt this person or reminded them of a time that they would probably like to forget. I need to own my part in that, and respect that if this is a trigger for them, then I need to figure out another way in which to communicate. I
Mhm.
can't just show up like, well, that's just me, and I'm just going to be me, even though me showing up in a way, in some kind of way, I should say, may actually harm you. Like, I need to
Mhm.
respect you enough to say, okay, well, maybe I need to rephrase that.
Right.
That way you can take ownership of what you're feeling and experiencing, but I can also be responsible and take ownership of how I'm communicating as well. And if I can do it differently, I have an obligation to do so.
Right, right. And I love something that you said a moment ago about your right to be respected or treated with dignity, and as a human comes with you just being able to breathe breath, you know. And so in the workplace it becomes challenging because in most corporate settings you find toxicity, whether you're in a for-profit or a non-profit environment, to where there's a lot of bullying and a lot of discrimination and a lot of things that are going on. I talked about this recently, the suicide of the HBCU
very
administrator.
sad.
Yes, that to me, it kind of took me in a space for a few days, because I've been there, right? When you're trying to create a life for yourself and your family. And I'm sure a lot of people depended on her. But it's a real thing. It is a real thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And so we in the workplace have to be sensitive to that. We have to be more cognizant and more aware of our surroundings, because there are people who are struggling with a myriad of things that some of it has to do with work and some of it doesn't. But at the end of the day, I always tell people, we don't blow our personal problems into a balloon and tie it up with a string and tie it outside on the bike rack, right? Until we get off work. It follows us. And so and that's just a natural part of life. And as employers, we have to recognize that people are not, they have personal problems, and those personal problems come into the workplace, just like those workplace problems come into the home from time to time, right? Like, no one wants to talk about that, but see, it's a two-way street. And so what I think we need to do in order to get better is we have to recognize that, accept it, and then work really, really diligently on helping people to safely resolve our challenges in both worlds, right? Like in both our personal and our work, because they're not as separate as people might like to think. This isn't church and state, right? It's not a separate entity. It becomes one in the same. You only need to ask, someone who, has had to miss a special event for their children because of a work challenge, or had to stay later and miss dinner because of a work challenge, or had to take off work because they needed to care for family or needed to take care of a personal health issue or mental health issue. They coexist, and we spend more time at work than we spend anywhere. And so this is where we have to own that we've got to be willing to be cognizant and sensitive to the fact that people's jobs and livelihoods does weigh very heavily upon their psychological well-being. And then we need to treat it as such, with sensitivity and empathy and care. And when we see people struggling, we need to be willing to come alongside and help them. Right. Whether it's work related or not. And I'm not proposing that we become psychologists, because I'm not. There are no credentials behind my name, right, that would say I'm a psychologist. But as a supervisor, I need to be sympathetic to the fact that I've got a staff person going through something, and I need to make sure that I am resourcing them with the right benefits to help them work through whatever they might be dealing with on a personal level. I feel like as a good leader, I have a moral obligation to do that.
Yeah.
And I was going to kind of wash my hands of it.
Right. Absolutely. I was going to say, any advice that you give to individuals when they're struggling through times like that. But I really wanted to touch on something that you just said a moment ago around, I don't have credentials around my name. And I agree with you 100% that there needs to be an element to leadership that helps us to cultivate our skill set with how do we deal with the human side of the human resources that we are managing and leading each and every day. That does come with a certain psychological aptitude to be able to assess and understand the human psyche, the human behavior, and just at least from an organizational perspective. But many organizations do not require that, but they throw leaders into positions, and there is an expectation that they would know without knowing.
Yes.
So
that emotional intelligence is simply not there. And again, it goes back down to something I said earlier, which has to do with that knowing yourself and having that those behavioral assessments where you know yourself so well, you know how you're going to show up in certain circumstances and situations. For, going back to, my childhood where I wasn't allowed in that person's home. The question that I often ask when I think about that scenario is, what was it that went through the minds of those families, right? That they thought it was okay for one child to be allowed to come in through the front door, but the other one to not be allowed to come into the front door. Why was there not this emotional intelligence that would tell them, if you do that, then you would be harming the one child and sending a message to that child that they are less than, that they are not good enough, that they are not whatever, fill in the blank, right? But when we don't stop and pause and think about our actions and reactions, right? Then we don't realize that how we show up is how people are going to experience us, and how they experience us has very real consequences to their psychological well-being.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, I think that a lot of times we become so complacent with our cultural norms that some of these dysfunctions and toxic behaviors become almost so invisible to us that we are not conscious of it. Had that same situation been done in the reverse to their children, I'm almost certain that they would have seen it for exactly what it was. It's an atrocity to treat a child that way, especially in their formative years, where we are here to help to develop the next generation. So that's a huge, that's a huge challenge for me. But I wanted to
and that
talk
shows up in
about
the workplace. So if you were to apply that same principle in the workplace, that still shows up in the workplace, right? Like I've got, I am a leader who has the authority to make change and the authority to grant promotions and the authority to hire certain people. And I am looking for people that I believe have earned the right to sit alongside me at the table, right? And so I look, so when you are emotionally intelligent, you understand that, hey, I need to treat this with care. I need to treat my decisions, the things I say and the things I do, with care. I need to be cognizant that these people need to be treated equitably and fair, right? And consistent, and not based off of any bias that I have. Or sometimes it's not a bias, sometimes it's loyalty. Yeah, sometimes you can just flat out be loyal to those friends and family and people who think and look like us, right? And I mean that's a very real bias. But we have to be conscious of that bias, and we have to lean in and press against it so that we would say to ourselves, why would I treat this employee different than this employee? And if the answer is, well, I know this one, or I grew up with this one, or this one's a friend of mine, or this one looks more like me, thinks like me, this one's going through a really rough time. If it's any of those things that are not equitable and subjective, or objective, I should say, and more subjective in nature, then you should not make a decision based off of the subjectivity of those things, because that's really in essence what happens in the workplace. And then the result of that is someone feels slighted. Someone feels like they don't belong. Someone feels like they didn't get the promotion because they're not good enough, or because they're not, wide enough, or because their dialect is not as, culturally conformed enough. Any of those things do harm how we create and how we promote and how we are able to be successful and effective in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. The organization that I currently work for, they put a lot of emphasis on community development and engagement. And so I found myself maybe a year or so ago involved in a group, and our job was to look at our practices around recruitment and retention. And so, I mean, recruitment and yes, retention. And I think that I tried to help the organization understand that it's not fair to bring marginalized or minorities into an environment that does not have a strong presence for belonging. I think one of the things that I can best relate to is that desire and that need to belong, especially when you understand that you do belong. I listened to a lot of people talking about the, what is that term a couple of years ago? I just talked about this the other day. Brene Brown, what is it? They always say that the imposter syndrome. And it's not that the times we feel like imposters. We know that we belong because we were there when we had to overachieve, when we had to go the extra mile, when we had to even present ourselves in a way to fit in a culture that rejects us. So we don't feel that we don't belong. We are made to believe that we don't. Going back to your experience as a child, there's nothing that you did that would denote that you didn't belong coming through the front door. Everything, you are a walking, breathing human being, and not to mention you are someone's beloved child. You should be able to walk through that door, but because of their biases, they shut you out or created a separate path for you. It's a challenge in the workplace, and I know you've probably seen a lot of things in your HR career as it relates to those types of dynamics. For me, personally, I try to protect organizations when it comes to people who make them liable. It's like, got to be kind of careful, to be fair and equitable. But most importantly, if we can master that one part, which is belonging, helping people to know that they belong in these spaces and in these environments. So I love how you brought that up.
Yeah. And and I love how you talked about like just that creating an atmosphere to let people know that they belong. Because if you have not already done the heavy lifting and broke up that fallow ground, right, to make sure that the seed you're bringing in will actually, take root and then produce the fruit that you want it to, belonging, then it will not happen. You see, because I don't know about you, Dom, but I mean, I was told, growing up, hey, you've got to be twice as good to be considered equal. And actually, as a woman, I began to think, nope, I've got to be 3 times as good to be considered equal. And going back to my childhood example, I realized the moment I came back to my friends and they let me in the front door and I didn't have to go around back, that I was actually better than them. That told me I'm better than you now, because if I wasn't, then you would make me come in the back door. So when we come into a situation in the employment world and we have a seat at the table, many of us already know that we are 2 to 3 times as good or we wouldn't have been invited. And so to try to make people of color and women and other, diverse people feel like they got to earn their way to be at the table. Trust me, many of us already know we've already earned the right to be at that table a couple times over, or we would have never been invited. And so
Right.
to not already treat us as though we belong is, in my opinion, very disrespectful and kind of a slap in the face. And yes, and in this day and age, we have a generation that has, arisen that says, yeah, we're not going to stand for that. Like, we know we belong,
I
and you
love
will
them.
treat us like we belong, or we will opt out.
Yes, I love when I tell you, and you see the smile on my face. I get excited when I think about the millennials and the X. I can't remember all
Yeah.
of the acronyms. When I tell you they are my heroes, sheroes, the way that they handle this working environment, corporate America. I just
Yeah.
love getting up under them because they're so bold. And like you said, they will opt out.
They'll just opt out.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, I belong at this table, but if you don't want me, I'll opt out.
I'll go somewhere else. My dad always
I'm not
told
gonna
us
come
this-
every week and try to
right,
prove to
right,
you that I belong.
right.
Yeah,
Because
it's
I already
definitely not
found
that
it in there.
generation.
My dad would tell us because again, I grew up with 12 siblings. There were 3
Yes.
boys and 9 girls. And my dad was very determined to make sure that we were ready for the world. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, his strategy for that was knowledge is power. So he worked very intently with us to make sure that we were intelligent people, or at least to his definition of an intellect. But he used to tell us, you have 3 strikes against you. You're Black, you are a woman, and you are poor. And this world is not going to treat you kindly. So therefore, you can't be milly-moused about it or polite. You have to, as the Bible tells us, the kingdom suffereth violence and the violent taketh by force. He wasn't a religious man, but he sure instilled that principle in us as we were growing up. And so as a woman coming from Detroit, Michigan, which was predominantly Black, I had a sense of pride and worthiness when I came, or self-worth when I came to Ohio. And it was a complete culture shock for me when I understood all of the caste and class dynamics that were in this town.
Yes.
The
awareness of disparities when you have been economically disadvantaged is huge, right? I mean, this I'm just speaking for myself, but having that acute awareness that I did not have as much economically as other people really did. It did become a driving force for me. It made me want to be, like you said. I love when you said, like, you had intelligence that, I was like, oh, I'll be the smartest one in the room, right? Like, I will learn as much as I can. I became a sponge. I was like, when I get into a position, I will work harder than anyone. I will learn it faster. I mean, these are the things that, really drove kind of my passion towards, just demonstrating. I think initially I wanted to demonstrate to others that I belonged, right? But then there just came a point in time when I just said, nah, this is actually for me. Like, I need to know how much can I do? How much can I learn? How vast and how wide and how deep can I expand my knowledge base so that I can empower, not just for myself, but so that I can empower other people to also live out their dreams and become the best version of themselves. And so that's really been kind of my motivating driver. is just, hey, do this for you. One of my favorite, I don't know if you've ever seen, I'm a horse lover, as you can see. And one of my favorite movies is Secretariat. And this horse has, to this day, no one has broke this horse's record. But what was interesting about this horse's journey was that, he, against all odds, this horse, ran fast. And, even though he would place, he would never really consistently come in first, right? And then in this kind of last ditch effort race, they just decided, we're going to push this horse and see, will he break will he break and not be able to run again? Or will he come in first? And that's what they hoped they would get out of it, right? But actually what they got when they pushed this horse to the breaking point is they pushed this horse so much that not only did he break, but he broke out. You know what I mean? So he didn't break, he broke out. And when he broke out, to this day, here we are decades later, and there's not been a horse that's ever lived that's been able to break that record. And that's kind of how I feel about the people that I'm trying to empower. We've been pushed on, right? We've been pushed and pushed and pushed almost to a breaking point. Yeah. But if I had a motto, it would be, no, I'm not going to break in, I'm going to break out. And when that happens, the floodgates are going to be open, and a lot of people will follow. And that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. No, I know, and I can absolutely relate. I was just thinking as you were talking this year, and I shared this recently. This year, I will be 50 at the end of the year. This is my golden jubilee. And Woo! So I know that for so many years, I have contained myself in the corporate environment in such a way that I tried to ebb and flow with their rhythm. I think over the last maybe year or two, something happened and something kind of clicked. I'm almost like that horse. I came and I kind of broke out. And I'm break out. I'm it's not a question of do I belong? It's a reality that while I'm here, you ain't gonna push me off. You're not gonna get rid of me. So you should have thought about that before you opened up the gates. But now that I'm here, I am here to stay.
You're here to win. Yeah. Now that the gate is open, I mean to take the prize.
and not only that, I'm bringing some in with me.
That's it.
That's my purpose. That's my purpose.
But I know because what people don't realize is that when you break out and you are doing what it is that God has uniquely wired you to do, it encourages other people to do what they're uniquely wired to do. It's a fire that catches, right? And so, but you're right. People try to keep you in the box, press you into the mold, try to, make sure you stay within the frame,
Yeah.
But nope. I'm a firm believer that, nothing spectacular ever comes from normalcy, but from that person who creates the new level of normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's your girl. Who is it? This guy right here. But I was going to ask you too, because you've been on both sides of it. Any advice that you would give to the leader who is leading individuals and organization, who has to struggle through how do you effectively navigate through this? And as that human resource that is going through the challenge, how do you advise us? Can't we all just get along, understanding, knowing that these dynamics that have been built in the corporate American culture or any working environment is not going to easily dissipate? So what do we do to survive working with each other in an effective and efficient way?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question, because first I want to speak to the leaders. Leaders have to lead courageously. They have to be willing to set aside their own agendas, their own egos, so that they can effectively lead people. And people are individuals who have various challenges, varying strengths and weaknesses. We all have them. And we need to lead courageously enough to allow people to play to their strengths and then shore up those weaknesses. So bridge the gap, be willing to step in and bridge the gap, and get the right players in position to offset everyone's weaknesses so that the team as a whole can be effective in moving, the organization's goals forward. That's first off. And that sounds very simple, doesn't it? But it actually isn't, because what usually ends up happening is you've got, a leader who wants to lead well, and then you've got a boss who wants to achieve a certain goal by any means necessary. And so if that means, that you're not using a carrot, but now you're using stick,
Right.
and if that means, instead of influencing, you're now micromanaging and telling people, then that's what it means. And we have to move away from that, because mentally, people cannot handle it. Motivation cannot be extrinsic. It cannot be outside of the individual. It must be motivation, intrinsic motivation. It cannot come from the outside in. It has to be from the inside out. That way, when the supervisor takes their foot off the gas, then what ends up happening is that, like that story of Secretariat that I was telling you about, when he was no longer driving that horse was like, oh, I got this. And he was holding on for dear life for the ride. And so, and that brought the entire team to a victory, right? So that's what leaders have to lead courageously. And that means you may have to push back on a supervisor that wants you to show up in a way that creates what you had mentioned earlier about toxic workplaces, because some of those negative behaviors create a toxic work environment when they consistently show up. And what ends up happening is they intend to just use it once, right? I'm just going to use the stick once. I'm just going to micromanage once. I'm just going to tell them to do it this way or once. But when they get the result they want, they begin to think this is the way. And it's like, no, that was supposed to be a temporary fix. And now you've made it like kind of the rule, and not the exception. And now it's happening consistently, and that creates toxic workplace. That's my opinion. With HR has to do better about, pouring into their leaders and becoming more of a partner. We've got all these crazy titles out here now, but at the end of the day, we are still, it's all about the people. It's all about the individuals. And so we need to partner with leaders and give them the support that they need, and the tools that they need, and the resources that they need to show up as the best version of themselves. And that might mean giving them an assessment. It might mean saying to a CEO, a CFO, a GM, hey, I know that this is your best guy or girl, and they are doing really good as an individual contributor, but they are not a leader. They're not ready to lead a team, and not allowing that individual who's not ready to lead a team into a leadership role until they are ready. And that takes, again, a great deal of courage and insight and patience to be able to identify those things and to say those things. But it's imperative if you are going to have healthy workplaces. I mean, So, John Maxwell has said it probably the best. He said, organizations rise and fall based upon their leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So if the leader is sick, guess what? Shows the rest of the organization. If the leader is aggressive, well, the rest of the organization will be aggressive. If the leader leads in a toxic, unhealthy way, so will that's what the rest of the organization is going to lead as. So we got to make sure that we have emotionally and psychologically healthy leaders in place, leading people, and then holding them accountable to showing up in a way that promotes health and allows people to express themselves in a way that they're naturally wired. And I believe that if HR people can do that, then they can change the game. Like, we got to get out of the weeds. Too busy with the compliance, too busy with I'm not saying those things aren't necessary, but we've got to be more strategic and less tactical. We have to know who the people are. We have to fight for the people. We have to, do the right thing all the time, even when it's inconvenient. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to be willing to walk away when our voice is being silenced at the table. And I understand, like, everybody's got, mouths to feed, we got bills to pay. But at the end of the day, like, if united, we can stand, but
Mm-hmm.
divided will fall. So we need to unite around those core values that will promote health in the workplace.
Yes, for sure. Well, we have come to the end of the hour. And again, I want to welcome you to come back sometime very, very soon. I love talking to you. And for sure you have been an inspiration for me. And I applaud and appreciate
Oh,
all
thank
that you
you,
do in
Dawn.
the community. And I just want you to, before you go, let everybody know how they can get in touch with you. Let them know what you're doing these days and how we can support some of the efforts that you're doing, as well as how organizations can reach out and procure your services.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I am motivationally speaking and coaching and training and doing leadership games for the Vine People Solutions. And I can be reached at the VP solutions.com. Again, that's the VP solutions.com. And you can schedule time to talk to me, watch some of our or subscribe to our YouTube channel as we release weekly tidbits on how to best empower your people to become the best version of themselves on a weekly basis. So thanks again, Dawn, for having me. It has been a pleasure.
Yes, it has been my pleasure. And thank you too, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.